After almost 2 decades of dominance, it's time for the Pittsburgh Penguins to finally rebuild. But with three franchise players still on the roster, how likely is it that this team really bottoms out? This is the 25-26 deep dive on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Hello and welcome to team number 28 in my power rankings, the Pittsburgh Penguins. And this is a team in a very unique situation because obviously, like I mentioned in the intro, they still have Crosby, Malkin, and Letang on the roster. Erik Karlsson's still there as well. So this core that they kind of put together over the last couple of years, and then obviously from the start with the other three, minus Karlsson, is still here. And the biggest question for the Penguins is how bad can they actually be with somebody like Sidney Crosby on the roster? And that's what we're going to kind of look at today because there's some parts of this team that I really like, and I actually think that Kyle Dubas has done a good job navigating this situation based on what this team has, and we're going to jump into that here as we go along. But it's really a unique situation because obviously they moved Jake Ensel a couple years ago, and now he's off in Tampa Bay. They've been looking to kind of move Raquel for the last little bit, and that hasn't happened. And Erik Karlsson's been on the trade block a bunch, and that hasn't happened yet. So it's really been a bunch of margin moves for the Penguins the last year and a half. And I think a lot of those moves have been good, but I don't think it's moved the needle that much either direction, right? I don't think it's made them significantly worse, and I don't think it's really made them significantly better. Now they're stuck in this kind of, we need to be bad, but we can't be super bad because we're not trading Crosby, Malkin, and Letang unless they request to be traded. And at this point, I don't know what Chris Letang's value really is on the market, so he's just kind of, he is what he is at this point. And even Malkin to a lesser extent. Like, I don't know how many teams looking for second-line centers are going to commit to Evgeny Malkin for more than this season because, like, most of the teams looking for second-line centers aren't true, like, cup contenders anyway, right? Like, I don't think Evgeny Malkin to the Canadiens, for instance, makes them, any more legitimate of a contender than they were to begin with. And I think you can say that for most teams looking for second-line centers, right? Like, I don't think Evgeny Malkin saves the Winnipeg Jets, for example. So Sidney Crosby is really the only huge bargaining chip here, and Sidney Crosby isn't getting traded unless he wants to get traded. So it puts them in this unique situation where they need to rebuild, but they can't because they have this big looming piece on their team who is still one of the best players in the league, who needs to be on the team because of legacy reasons, basically. And that makes this a difficult situation for Kyle Dubas because when you have a draft coming up here, especially where the guy supposed to go number one is going to be really good, and even like a couple of guys below him are also projected to be fairly good. It makes this a tough situation because there are teams like we've talked about that I think are likely to finish lower than the Penguins just because of that. But I also think that due to the fact that this team is actively looking to tear it down, I couldn't really put them higher than 28th at the moment. But let's dive into the official ratings for this team. 19th in offense is definitely the strength of this team, both on offense as well as special teams, being 14th. Defense is 25th, goaltending is 27th, coaching culture is 20th. Overall, like, I don't hate where this roster is at right now. It's just like if they didn't have Sidney Crosby, this team would be a lot easier to figure out where they're going to go because then trading Raquel would be a lot easier. Moving like even a guy like Brian Rust would be a lot more simple. Even moving Erik Karlsson to a lesser extent would be a bit simpler because you'd be able to eat part of that cap and not be as tight to it if you're able to do that. It's just like there's guys on this team that are good, but it's just the team's too old to be competitive on their own. But they can't trade Sidney Crosby, and that's really the core issue of where the Penguins are, right? Like I think they made a ton of moves this year that I think are good, like depth additions, like on the margins of this roster. We're gonna touch on a couple of them as we go through this. And I think those moves have all been good, like on their own, but it's just the totality of where this team's at can't really move in either direction until they like fully commit, right? Like if this team wants to give it one more go, which I don't see them being able to do, even if they did go all in, like they don't have the pieces to do that. or they need to commit to fully rebuilding, and that means trading Sidney Crosby. So Kyle Dubas is kind of stuck in what he can do. Like, there's only so much you can do with this roster aside from moving Crosby, which again won't happen unless he says it will, and then he's only going to want to go to like 2 or 3 teams anyway. So the return package isn't going to be that significant, or at least not as significant as you'd expect it to be for a generational top 5 player of all time. And it makes life difficult on him, right? So as we jump into my coach and culture ratings, for example, you're going to see that, right? Like, Cal Dubas have it a B-, which some people may think is too high. Some people might think it's too low. But based on the situation that he's been put in here, I think he's done a really good job, right? Like, based on what he's had to work with, I think that they've weaponized as many assets as they could. I think that they've started to acquire and start to rebuild this prospect pool, although I don't think it's at like a very high level at the moment. It is a team that's starting to recoup those assets and rebuild this team kind of without bottoming out, because that's not really an option at this point. And so in that sense, I think he's done a good job with what he's had to work with. So that's where the B- rating comes from. Dan Muse, they just brought in as their head coach. I'm not extremely familiar on Dan Muse, obviously first-time NHL head coach. So you get to see, that's kind of my baseline for first-time coaches. It's an intriguing hire from what I've seen on him, but it'll be interesting to see how he works out behind an NHL bench. And I appreciate the fact that Cal Dubas went outside the box and did the same thing with Sheldon Keefe, right? Where he went and got a first-time head coach there, and Sheldon Keefe turned out to be a pretty solid coach overall, depending on what you think of his playoff record. But again, Toronto didn't do much this year either, right? Like they went to Game 7 against Florida, right? So they still had the second round loss, but regardless, I don't blame Sheldon Keefe for that, and I think Dan Muse is an interesting hire. As for this team's outlook, like until they move Sidney Crosby, I can't really put them in rebuilder, because I don't see a team with Sidney Crosby being a bottom 3 team in the NHL. So they get a C, they get tweener. If Tristan Jarry bounces back, maybe Pittsburgh's pushing for a playoff spot by the end of the year. Like, I don't think that's a super unrealistic position that they could end up in. Obviously, that depends on Tristan Jarry finding his game again, but he's proven that he can be a solid goalie in the NHL. So I don't think that that's a complete thing that just can't happen. But we jump into what this team looked like last year, and the power play was good, and the penalty kill was pretty average, so that works out to being a top half of the league special teams unit, which is where I had them 14th. The 5-on-5 play was not good. Right, like now they generated a decent amount of expected goals, but they just couldn't finish. 22nd in goals for, 30th in goals against, 23 in expected goals against. It wasn't good. They were obviously the goaltending hurt them a little bit in that situation there. But the thing I do see working out for them is the finishing ability, right? Like if this team can kind of regress back to where they should be, in quotes, things could look better, right? Like if they can bounce back there. The problem that I have is that, like, the rumors are they're trying to move out all the pieces that could be good finishing talent for them, right? Like Raquel might be on his way out, or Erik Karlsson might be on his way out. Those are all guys who could help boost the goals for this team, but they're all possibly getting shipped out. So that makes things difficult. I don't think this team's defense is going to get much better, especially if they move guys like Raquel. So like that's kind of where I see it. That's where it leads to their 28th overall rating. Is I don't know where the improvement on these numbers are, right? Like, if anything, the power play is going to get worse if any of those guys get moved out. And the power play is the strength of this team, for sure. And then you have, defensively, obviously, getting rid of Erik Karlsson is actually probably going to help net defensively, but it's going to tank the offense even more than it already is. And then Raquel's a pretty good two-way player, so like if he ends up getting moved, then that hurts there too. So I don't think they've improved really on any of these categories with any of the margin moves that they've made. but I also don't think that they're going to get any better if those players do end up getting moved. So that's kind of where they end up where they are. So jumping into the offense, obviously the big piece here is Sidney Crosby, right? Like now, I'm probably gonna get some pushback on the C grading for Crosby's defense, so I want to kind of touch on that. I go into a bit more, but his defensive numbers in terms of like suppression of chances has gone down significantly over the last couple years. He has been responsible for a lot more expected goals against over the last couple years, and that does probably play a part in the level of teammates that he's had over that time. Also just making up for the lapses in defense, like both Letang and Erik Karlsson have dropped off a bit in terms of defensive play. Well, Erik Karlsson's always been bad, but and just like the kind of cycle of wingers that he's had, right? Like his a lot of his battles have been decent, but it's just the shot suppression's really dropped for him. You look at somebody like Evgeny Malkin on this team too, who is still competent enough second line center, but I just don't know if trading for him now for teams looking for a 2C makes a lot of sense. Just because I feel like he'll be a deadline move if he gets moved at all. Obviously, they've said that they're not looking to re-sign him, so I think that the likelihood that Malkin does get moved at the deadline goes up. And as a second line center for a team that's like a top 5 or 6 team in the league, makes a lot of sense to trade for than a team like the Canadiens or Jets or whatever, making a move for a 2C now, just because you don't really know where they are or where they're going to be at that point. So maybe Malkin gets moved and he goes for another cup run. That seems to be like the Patrick Kane type situation that was in Chicago last year. I don't think that he gets a ton, so I don't think it's really a needle mover move there, because obviously they're going to ship him out wherever he wants to go, if he wants to go at all. So that does make that situation a bit more interesting. Rutger McGroarty is an interesting one. Obviously, his ratings are low because he's barely played in the NHL, so there's not much I can do about that. But other than that, like the depth scoring on this team isn't great. I do like Tommy Novak. I think that was an intriguing ad by Kyle Dubas. I like Tommy Novak. I think that he could be in for a bounce back and maybe slot into that 2C role, at least for the next couple years, possibly. Once Malkin goes and maybe Crosby moves on as well. Other than that, though, like Blake Lizotte a good defensive forward, but he's not going to add a ton of secondary scoring. I really like Anthony Mantha. I think Anthony Mantha is a super intriguing player on this team, and it's one of the bets that Kyle Dubas has made that I think is super fascinating and could maybe slot into this top 6, especially if a Raquel trade does happen. But then it's just, guys like Kevin Hayes and Justin Brezzo and Noel Acciari, which is a fine fourth line, but it's not really anything special. So, overall, the offense still has flashes, but there's just not enough depth here for me to say that it's great. But it's also not nearly bad enough to be bad. So that's where I think it was 19th rating comes from. Because Sidney Crosby elevates the floor of this group significantly, but there really isn't any more significant floor raisers on this team besides him. And speaking of Sidney Crosby, his offensively still one of the best players in the league. On the power play, still one of the best players in the league. His finishing is still among the best. His assists are great. There really isn't. He's playing against insane competition. You're talking about one of the best offensive players in the league still, right? Now his defense has dropped off a bit the last couple of years, right? He had a better season last year than he did the year before, but the defense really hasn't been there. It's just that Crosby's able to mitigate that with his insane puck skills. And when this team's on offense, he knows how to, you can really tell, if you watched him in any sort of capacity in the defensive zone, he's able to use his positioning and his ability to retrieve the puck to mitigate a lot of those without the puck defensive lapses, right? Because he's getting older. He's not as fast as he used to be, right? He's going to his age 38 season. It's not going to be the same fast-paced without the puck Sidney Crosby, right? But he's able to use those bursts and his elite IQ to really make up for those defensive lapses, right? So his on the ice numbers don't look great, but his hockey IQ is still obviously arguably the best in the NHL. So you can really see him use that, especially in the defensive zone, even though his results are starting to drop down. So I think that there's as a bit of context to the C rating, although I really can't go higher than that just because of how poor the on ice results have been compared to where he's usually been. By the way, C is like supposed to be like an average ish defender, like a middling, like kind of above average kind of rating. So just to give you a bit of context for that. But, you look at his micros, right? And this is kind of what I'm talking about, where with the retrievals, right? Like he's now his exit percentages are not great, and his exits with possession aren't great either. So he's losing battles, right? But when he does win battles, the puck's getting out of the zone, and I think that's where you see a lot of the excitement for what Sidney Crosby is as a player, because he has that ability to still win. Like when he does win battles, the puck's getting out of the zone, and having that ability makes him, at least optically, look like a much better defender, because when he wins those battles, the puck's getting out of the zone, and he's usually able to generate that into some sort of offense. So when you have those kind of players, right, like optically when you're watching him play, he's going to seem like a much better defender, because like every time he gets the puck, it's getting out of the zone. It's just that a lot of the times he isn't getting the puck out of the zone because he's not winning those battles. So that's kind of, again, just giving more context to the defensive rating and how I'm seeing Sidney Crosby's game at this point. But again, like when he has the puck, he is still one of the most effective players with it, right? Like his passing is still insane. He's getting the puck into high danger areas significantly, right? His chance assists are some of the best in the league. A lot of his other numbers are good, not great, but overall, like he's scoring at a very efficient rate. He's getting pucks into high danger areas if he's not the one scoring, and all those things are going to be super valuable both to the Penguins this year, and then it also still makes him an insanely valuable asset in terms of trade market, right? Like if he does give the Penguins a list of 5 teams that he wants to go to, all of a sudden that trade market gets significantly better, right? Now if that list is 2 teams, that makes things difficult. If it's 1, then then we're looking at an even significantly less package than what Crosby should fetch. But if he's able to give the Penguins a list of 4 or 5 teams and say these are the teams I want to go to, I don't care who those teams are, they're all going to give up significant assets to get Sidney Crosby, because it's Sidney Crosby, and most of those teams, right? Like if you think about the teams that he could potentially go to, like a Colorado. Like Nathan McKinnon's going to be the first line center in Colorado, right? Like Sidney Crosby is their second option, which is something that he's never been able to do, which is going to significantly also decrease his competition level, right? So that'll make defensive play easier. That'll make his offensive play easier. Like he'll be a way more effective player as a second line center on a lot of these teams, and really take a lot of that burden off himself that he's had in Pittsburgh, essentially since he came into the NHL. The other player to talk about here is Evgeny Malkin, and the Evgeny Malkin fall off has been drastic. Now a lot of it was injuries, and a lot of it's just age has caught up to him like a normal human being, unlike Sidney Crosby, who's certainly not a normal human being. But defensively, Malkin is extremely porous, giving up a ton of chances, and this is against still good competition, but less competition than Crosby's had. And his offensive numbers just aren't there, at least 5-on-5 right now. He got a B. A lot of that's just out of respect, because I think that in a more favorable situation, Malkin's probably putting up better offensive point totals than he is in Pittsburgh. It hasn't been a very favorable situation for him, especially. And I think a lot of people kind of have ignored that, right, in this conversation, because a lot of it is focused on who's going to play with Sidney Crosby. But Malkin's always kind of got that shorter end of the stick in terms of teammates, at least the last couple of years. And the team seems to be more geared towards what's going to make Crosby happy, compared to trying to actually elevate Evgeny Malkin, which I think has led to some of the failures here in Pittsburgh. And again, power play wise, Malkin's still really effective, because he doesn't have to move, right? Like you can definitely tell that the skating speed has went down with Malkin, and the age has caught up to him a bit, or a lot in this case. Do I think that he could still be useful somewhere? Yes, but I think that the fit is has to be a lot more specialized than it is with Sidney Crosby. I don't think that any team adding up Kenny Malkin can just make it work. I think that you need to have the right line mates for him. You have to be able to put him in a favorable situation. Which is why I think a team like Winnipeg might not work, just because of how poor defensively their a lot of their offensive players already are. I don't know if he really fits there, right? Like, you need a very good defensively responsible roster to be able to make Malkin work, and I think that those fits are a little bit more difficult to do overall. Brian Rust is another guy that I think doesn't get talked about enough in the trade market, and maybe it's because he still has another 3 years left at a $5.1 million cap hit, which with the cap going up looks better, but at already going into his age 33 season, that brings him till 36, which makes that a little bit more difficult to stomach from a cap perspective. But offensively, this is still somebody who drives play extremely well. His finishing has been catching up to where his numbers have been, especially the last couple of years. Although his defense has dropped as well, which again makes him a little bit more difficult to fit into a system. Special teams, he's been fine. His finishing has gone up significantly. His goal scoring has gone up incredibly. He's still an above average passer. All the offensive numbers are there, and he's doing it against high competition as well. It's just the lack of defense that is definitely going to hurt what Brian Rust looks like overall. But if he's somebody that teams are interested in, I think he could come at a significantly lower cost than Raquel is, which makes him intriguing, right? Like, I think if you can kind of steal Brian Rust from under the market here and plug him into a team that's already pretty well set, I think that could be a very effective ad at something like a trade deadline or an off season that just kind of gets. I think especially like a trade deadline, I feel like a lot of people won't be talking about a guy like Brian Rust, and people will be like, oh, that's an interesting ad, and then he goes and he's like third on your team in points in the playoffs and you win the Stanley Cup. I think could be a very intriguing option for a team at a low cost, because Raquel is going to be the one that fetches a ton, and I think Raquel's better, but I don't know if Raquel is market wise better. Like, I think that they're similar enough in terms of what they can bring, like, in total value to a team, that the acquisition cost of Brian Rust will be significantly lower than it will be for Raquel, especially with like all the teams that have circled on Raquel over the last like year and a bit. But speaking of Rickard Raquel, offensively, not as efficient, not as good of a play driver as Brian Rust is, but he does bring the significantly better defense. So that's the two-way ability to. Do you care about the two-way ability more, or do you care about the pure offense more? And again, I think that depends on the team, right? Like, Rickard Raquel is probably a better fit across the league. Like, I think there's more teams that can take on a Raquel, which is why his market is going up. But at some point, the acquisition cost just is not worth the player. But then we saw Scott Laughton go for a first-round pick. So it's like it's hard to say kind of what the market will be for him. Obviously, the $5 million at 3 years is the same price, just $100,000 cheaper, and he is a year younger. So you have that going for you. But it still takes him to 35. It's still like a long enough contract. But that's why the Penguins don't really have to move him. Although I think that moving him before his inevitable age curve makes more sense. But I'm sure that they're looking into that. I think that he's the likely guy that gets moved to the deadline this year, just based on how often he's been on the market. But again, I think that depends on where the Penguins finish. So it's a weird situation. But I like Raquel. I think that his defensive abilities are very underrated as a two-way option. And if he can kind of keep his finishing where it was last year, that if he can continue to outscore his expected goals, that'll be useful for plenty of teams, and that kind of would show a bit more stability if he can do it for a second season. Tommy Novak I mentioned earlier, and as your 3C, I think he's pretty good. He's pretty average defensively, above average offensively, generates a ton of expected goals for replacement. His underlying numbers are always pretty good. His His quote-unquote micro stats are also pretty good. Possession-wise, he doesn't turn the puck over a ton. He's pretty good at transitioning through the offensive zone, which is something that the Penguins need. Gives them more stability. And, at 28 years old, he's somebody that Pittsburgh can kind of ride for the next couple of years, right? Like, he's not somebody they have to immediately flip and turn into an asset. He's somebody that they can kind of use as their middle six center, whether that's on the third line like it projects to be now, or somebody who could elevate themselves to the second line if a Crosby or Malkin trade happened. He's going to be able to add some stability to this team. He's not going to blow you away, but Tommy Novak can be a useful player for this team and then eventually turn into a trade asset for them a little bit down the line. But I think this is somebody they should hold on to, at least for a bit, because he's not going to get you a ton. And especially if he can bounce back to like his season in Nashville a couple years ago, he'll be a lot more effective player, right? Like last year was a down year for him, which is why I think the Predators decided to move on. But if he can kind of bring that balance back up to look more like a top six center than a middle six center, the Malkin move makes a lot more sense, and this team's able to have a bit more roster flexibility if this is the guy that they want kind of moving into the top six. Rickard McGroarty is the wild card on this team, right? Like, this model, if you're watching on YouTube, is based on NHLE, which is a stat that uses his junior numbers to project his junior points to project what he'll look like in the NHL. It isn't historically insanely accurate, but it's kind of the best we have in a lot of cases for players, at least when you're comparing players from like across different leagues, because different leagues offer different like opportunities for statistical tracking. So NHLE is kind of the most universal thing that we have. I don't love it, but it's just supposed to give some context. But Rickard McGroarty, his floor is pretty high. I don't know how high the ceiling is on him. Playing with Sidney Crosby is certainly going to help boost that ceiling, at least to start. So I do think that's probably the best play is to give him the opportunity to play with Crosby and kind of see what happens. Obviously somebody that the Penguins are hoping can work out because he wanted to come here. I haven't seen like a huge raise in his in his numbers. When you look at his NHL equivalency, and it's been pretty stable. After his draft year, it hasn't really jumped up a ton. But again, like playing with Sidney Crosby is probably going to help his development, right? Like it's not going to hurt. And I think that he's a smart enough player that he can handle that. It's just going to be a matter of being able to keep up for a full season. And if they can get a decent first line winger out of Rickard McGroarty, or even like a really solid second line winger, I think that's a win overall for his development at this point. So he's intriguing. He's probably the most intriguing player to watch on this team, and I'm interested to see what he looks like as a full-time NHLer. Blake Lizotte, another guy I want to touch on quickly. Defensively, Blake Lizotte is extremely underrated. His competition's actually like at a decently high level for what he is. His shorthanded numbers are good, not great. But he's somebody who's pretty league average offensively and can bring that extra defensive presence. I think this is a guy who, he's bounced around a bit, and he's kind of played the same role in most places that he's been to. Blake Lizotte seems like somebody who would be a very, very good ad for like a third round pick at the deadline. Like I feel like that's third or fourth round pick. That's kind of what these players tend to go for. And if Pittsburgh's willing to move him, he could be a really good asset for a cup contender, just as like a good defensive third liner that can add a bunch of value there and not be a black hole offensively, right? And I think that's what makes guys like this super valuable. He's pretty average offensively, but he can be a very good stabilizing force on the defensive end. And there's some teams who we're going to talk about as the series goes on who might need some defensive stability in their bottom six. So I don't know how much value Blake Lizotte has to the Penguins, because they, in all likelihood, will not be competing at that level. But for a team maybe looking to add somebody, Blake Lizotte could be a good piece for that. And he's somebody that can move up into your top six if you you really need him to. In the same way that Joel Armia was able to jump up into the Canadiens' top six when there was injuries the last couple of years. But it's not ideal, clearly. Kevin Hayes, again, fourth line center. If the cap hit wasn't as significant as it is, Kevin Hayes would be a really intriguing option for a middle six center for a lot of teams. I still think he is, just because his underlying numbers are solid enough. His defensive numbers aren't great. Offensively, though, he does generate a pretty substantial amount of opportunity, although hasn't been able to finish on a lot of those chances. Again, it could just be based on the guys he's been playing with the last couple years, right? I don't think he's been in very good situations in both Philly and Pittsburgh. I don't think that the fit's been great for any of those teams. His time in St. Louis was fine. It wasn't anything super exciting, but I think he's an interesting player. I think he does add enough of a presence on this team, right? Again, if Evgeny Malkin does get moved, you can slide Hayes up to that second line center spot. You can slide Novak up to that second line center spot. It doesn't completely tank what the team is, if that's the case. So I think that's likely that they hold on to Kevin Hayes, but I think he's fine. In your bottom six, the cap hit is high, but that's why they brought him in, right? They got him for a pretty good deal when they brought him in. So again, just weaponizing cap space, weaponizing asset management, you get a pretty solid player out of it to play in your bottom six. Finally, Anthony Mantha. I had talked about how much I liked the Anthony Mantha ad. Now, these numbers do not include this past season because he was hurt, which is the big question mark, right? Is the fact that he really didn't play much recently, and that's why his ratings are kind of lower than they probably should be based on his numbers. But it's just we need to see it more defensively, though. Before last season, one of the best defensive wingers in the league. Extremely good at suppressing chances, right? I thought it was a very underrated part of his game. His ability to just kind of end rushes was significant, and he didn't do it with a super physical game, and I think that's why a lot of people didn't really gravitate to him as this really good shutdown winger. But again, this is somebody that I think in Pittsburgh, if played on the right situation, right, maybe he does end up playing with Evgeny Malkin, which I actually don't think would be a terrible thing. Maybe those offensive numbers can start to bounce back, and you can see him become this really good secondary two-way winger, right? And if that's what he can become, if he can become a Thomas Tatar light kind of, that'll be an insane player to move at the deadline, right? I think that could fetch the Penguins a pretty good haul, considering what the acquisition cost was for him, which was nothing. I think that's the plan, right? I don't think Anthony Mantha is going to be on this team beyond this season. But I do think that getting him and taking the chance on him as a deadline acquisition was a really, really low risk or no risk move, really, for Kyle Dubas, and I think it could turn out to be a pretty moderate to high reward if he's able to stay healthy and if he's able to play a pretty decent role in Pittsburgh. I mean, Anthony Beauvillier got them a pretty good package, and I think Anthony Mantha is a better player than Anthony Beauvillier. So, I think that he's definitely somebody to watch in terms of the trade market. Defensively, things don't look nearly as good, right? You have Chris Letang and Erik Karlsson, which are kind of the pillars on this blue line, which is, I'm using that word kind of strongly. But other than that, it's not... The outlook of this blue line isn't great, right? Ryan Graves is a fine, third-pair defenseman, but he shouldn't be playing first-line minutes. Connor Clifton and Ryan Shea are just okay. I really like Parker Wotherspoon, we're going to touch on. But, again, Parker Wotherspoon's a third-pair defenseman. So, there isn't a lot here. You have one top-pair defenseman, Erik Karlsson, who is likely to be traded, and then you have Chris Letang, who probably doesn't have a ton of value around the league and probably shouldn't be a first or pair defenseman anyway. It sets up, this is kind of where the ceiling caps out for this team, right? I think from here on out, it's really where the ceiling kind of you start to hit that what this team could be as a whole, right? I don't see a ton of development happening with any of these players. They're all just kind of who they are. If not, they're going to regress. So that's what gives me pause for thinking Pittsburgh might be okay this year. It's just there's not enough on this blue line that makes me excited. And the one guy that does is Erik Karlsson, who is likely to be moved, right? Like he's got 10 mil left with 2 years left. He's 35 years old, going to his 35th season. It's he's one of the best offensive defensemen in the league. He's one of the best offensive defensemen all time. The big thing with Erik Karlsson is his ability to just maintain this level of being one of the best pure OFDs in the league this late into his career is really impressive, right? Like we saw the Brent Burns fall off even, right? But Erik Karlsson hasn't had that. The problem is that he can't play defense, right? I think it would be, and this is gonna be crazy, I don't know how much it helps, but I think, and if the Penguins had a stronger defensive core, that this might be a more reasonable. But they're in a position right now where they can kind of just try things, and I don't hate the idea of throwing Erik Karlsson on the wing with Sidney Crosby for a bit and just seeing what happens, right? People might call me crazy for that, but I don't hate the idea to just mess around with what Erik Karlsson can be. And just see what happens, right? What's the worst case? The worst case is it doesn't work and you just move back to the blue line. He's still one of the best offensive defensemen in the league. But I just think that his offensive IQ is so valuable that you could run him. You basically run him as a fourth forward anyway. And at least then you could make up for that defensive lapse by just having 2 defensemen back there who are competent, defensively. I don't think that's it's a crazy idea, but I don't think it's an insane thing. I just think that Pittsburgh's in a situation where they could try that because winning isn't really a priority at this point, right? I don't think it's especially if they end up moving Raquel. Why not? Just throw him on a wing for 10 games and see what happens. I think it'd be fun. They're not going to do it because the hockey people are boring. But I don't know. Maybe you sell him as somebody who could play wing, right? I think he becomes a more fascinating piece to teams if you can sell him as this high energy offensive piece that doesn't need to be a good defender because he's not playing defense. It's crazy. It's never gonna happen. But it's gonna be really hard to sell a team on a $10 million Erik Karlsson who's the worst defenseman in the NHL in terms of defensive zone ability. It's gonna be really hard to sell that, especially at that cap hit. And I don't think the Penguins are in the market to eat a bunch of salary. Especially if a Sidney Crosby is going to get moved, and I think that's why they're kind of hesitant to do it. There's value here, right? There is value in Erik Karlsson. I just don't know how many teams can take advantage of that without getting him at a significant discount, and that's kind of the issue. Chris Letang, on the other hand, his micros look fine, but he really isn't. He isn't the first pair defenseman he's been, and based on age and salary, I don't know if there's if there's any takers on a Chris Letang, right? He's somebody that a team might bring in to be their 4th defenseman as a veteran who's won, but I don't think that's worth it for I think you can get better players for the amount that you'd have to give up in terms of cap hit and assets to get to get Chris Letang. He feels like the guy that's gonna be kind of stuck on this team until he retires. Which, hey, if Crosby and Malkin both move, at least they have somebody that the fans can kind of latch onto, and he's not going to help them win in the same way that Sidney Crosby will. So I don't hate him as being the last remaining piece from this dynasty team in Pittsburgh, because I don't think there's much of a market for Chris Letang, and it's unfortunate because he was he at one point he was one of the best defensemen in the NHL. He's probably a Hall of Famer. That's probably a little bit more of a edge case, but I think eventually he'll probably get in just because of how good he was during his prime. But he's just not there anymore. And it's very Duncan Keith-esque, right? It's very much a guy who used to be one of the top defensemen in the NHL and then just hit a wall and maybe a team bites on it, but I doubt it, right? Like, I don't see too many teams wanting to move out assets for Chris Letang. Ryan Graves is another player that I think I should talk about. He's pretty mediocre everywhere. He's middling in a lot of areas. He did get better compared to last season, and I think that's interesting at going into his age 30 season. But again, like 4 more years at 4.5, he's just gonna be somebody who's gonna be on this team during the rebuild to just stabilize the blue line. He's gonna be asked to do a lot more than he probably should be. I don't know. I don't see a ton. There's not a lot of upside here. Like I'm sorry, Penguins fans. This is where this video starts to kind of trail off. His penalty kill is good, but like he's playing against pretty weak competition. He's put up pretty middling numbers. So I think any ask for him to play higher up in the lineup, which is according to Puckpedia, he's going to be Chris Letang's partner or on the top line. I don't know, man. Like it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to try to cover that up. And, a lot of people had a lot of high hopes for Ryan Graves coming to Pittsburgh as he, being a solid, second pair kind of guy, third defenseman on this team behind Carlson and Letang. And it just hasn't really turned out to be that. And, going into, age 30, there's possibility for a bit of a bounce back. And I don't think the regression is going to hit him like a truck, but I don't think there's also a lot of movement up for Ryan Graves at this point. Last guy I want to talk about is Parker Wotherspoon. I touched on it. This is one of my guys. I love Parker Wotherspoon. I love the signing the second at half, and I was like, that's crazy. Everybody called me insane because he's a third pair defenseman. He played 55 games last year for a Boston team that wasn't very good. But offensively, you're not going to get a ton out of Parker Wotherspoon, right? His transition ability is actually not bad, but overall offensive generation, you're not getting a ton here. What you're getting Parker Wotherspoon for is the defensive stability. And as a third pair guy to kind of be a low event player, he is very good at that. And he is, 27 going to 28. So that's a concern in terms of like development. I don't think there's a ton of growth that's going to happen here with Parker, but just as a stabilizing force at the back end of this lineup, I think it is a really solid add, and he's going to get a lot of opportunity to play. And again, similar to a Anthony Mantha, it could become a trade piece by the end of the year, right? Like teams love their depth defensive defensemen, and if Parker can put up good numbers on a bad Penguins team, I think that could be a really intriguing add for a bunch of teams, right? Like his cap hit's really low. He brings that overall net value of being a reliable defensive option. Teams are going to bite on that, right? And again, I think that's a very good move by Cal Dubas to go get somebody who has a ton of value in that sense. In net, it's Tristan Jarry, right? Like this team lives or dies by Tristan Jarry. Joel Blomqvist I have on here because I made the graphic before the Silvos trade, but his grade would be basically the same, right? Like I'm not reading into the crazy like month and a half run he had in Vancouver a couple years ago. Although his AHL numbers have looked pretty good, so there is potential there for him to break out. But just like overall, looking at who he is right now, he wouldn't be much better than a 75. He might be a 76. So just if you're wondering, I don't think it moves the needle a ton. I think it was an interesting ad. The acquisition cost was nothing, so I'm fine with it. It was a good bet to take. I would have liked to see the Flyers take a bet like that. As we talked about their goaltending, or I guess the video cut out also with the Flyers video last time. I've looked to see if I have the original file. My original file got corrupted too, so unfortunately, that's just kind of what we're left with. Apologies for that. But anyway, when I talked about their goaltending, right, like I would have seen them like to take a risk on like a Caden Primo for a 7th round pick, or a Artis Sievos for nothing. I think it was a 4th or something, right? Like they didn't. They got Dan Vladar. It's fine. Like, or not Dan Vladar. I don't know. They got whoever it was from the Flames. Doesn't. It was Vladar. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's videos about Pittsburgh. Tristan Jarry is the real piece on this team, right? His penalty numbers are really good, by the way. He's extremely good on the penalty kill. But his save percentages have tanked the last couple years. His expected save percentages have tanked. Um, they're actually pretty in line with where he should be. He's very much just doing what he should be doing. Um, it's just that the team has gotten worse, which makes him look worse. Um, which I think is why this is an interesting case for me, because he's very much like doing what he's supposed to do. It's just like he's not raising the floor at all, right? He's tanking the same way the team is. But if Tristan Jarry can kind of find a bit of stability here, then he could almost like if Tristan Jarry bounces back, like does he become an interesting deadline piece for a team, right? Like if Tristan Jarry comes back and just has like this crazy start to the season, like I think the Oilers call on him, right? Like he seems like the kind of guy here that could be a unique in a unique situation, right? Like any sort of bounce back from him where he looks like he's helping lift the floor of the Penguins immediately makes him a intriguing piece for a ton of teams. And I think as soon as that happens, the Penguins need to pull the trigger on that, right? Because he's not going to be the future guy here. Already going into his age 30 season. He's got 3 years left at a $5.4 million cap hit. The John Gibson contract was movable. I think this one's still movable as long as he has some sort of floor lift to his game, and he's not just putting up numbers that match basically where he should be. I think that's kind of the important thing is here, right? Like I don't think Tristan Jarry's played like under what he should be. Like I don't think that there's been like a significant disparity, like difference between how he's played and the goals that he should be saving. Like I don't think that there's been a ton of gap there, but he also hasn't like done anything to be better than that. So that's kind of where the Jarry situation is right now. And if he can kind of elevate that even slightly, he'll look significantly better than the team does, and that increases his value. So that's one of the things I'm kind of watching with this goaltending situation. And then whoever ends up taking the backup spot in Pittsburgh should get a decent amount of games, especially if Jarry can't do that. So it's interesting. I could see all three guys playing significant time in Pittsburgh just based on what happened last year. So we'll see. I mean, it's an interesting situation. I don't think it's great, but again, like this is one of the reasons why the ceiling for this team probably isn't very high. And finally, the special teams. The special teams is definitely like the highlight of this team. Offensively, like you have guys like Sidney Crosby, who is great. Rickard Rakell's power play numbers are really good. Erik Karlsson obviously is one of the best power play guys in the league. There's definitely hope there. And then you just have other guys who could develop, right? Like a Rucker McGroarty, right? Who right now is a C- because he's never played on a power play in the NHL. But like that's somebody whose ceiling can go up, and special teams is definitely the strong part of this team. Funny enough, Chris Letang is actually like in terms of like shot suppression is one of the best penalty killer guys in the league, and he really lifts up the floor of that penalty kill along with Tristan Jarry. So it's an interesting unit. I don't know how much development there is aside from like McGroarty on the power play. It could get worse if some of these guys get moved. But I definitely think it's like the strong suit, especially the power play, for this team. And when you have guys like Crosby and Malkin and even Letang and Karlsson, the power play is not going to be bad. So there you go. That's number 28 on my my power rankings. We are 5 episodes in now, and it's been fun. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, and we'll see you for number 27. Make sure if you want to listen to this on audio versions, we have Spotify and Apple. Just look up NBA Hockey on those platforms. We have the shorter form posts on Instagram as well if you want to be updated when these posts come out. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.